A little girl saved her own life using this sign. On July the 6th, a 13-year-old girl was forced into a car in Texas. According to police, 61-year-old Stephen Salaban threatened her at gunpoint and took her on a terrifying journey. He drove over 1,000 miles to California with the little girl in his vehicle. Stephen had allegedly asked her how old she was, and when he found out that she had a friend in Australia, he lied to her and said that he was going to take her on a cruise there. The little girl used her initiative and wrote "help me" on a piece of paper. She then held it up at the window while she was in a car park. At this point, some members of the public saw the sign, and immediately called the police. Finally, 3 days after she was snatched, the police arrested Stephen. They found a replica firearm in his car, and they believe that he SA'd her multiple times while she was in the car. He faces a maximum sentence of life in prison.
These are videos humans were never meant to see. Okay, so the video I'm about to show you shows a woman on a plane completely freaking out over somebody that wasn't human. She got up talking all terrified, saying the person in the back was not human. And based off her reaction, is she lying? Many people believe she actually saw a reptilian shapeshifting. So without further ado, here's the video.
Say whatever you want. I'm telling you, I'm getting the fuck off, and there's a reason why I'm getting the fuck off, and everyone can either believe it or they cannot believe it. I don't give two fucks, but I am telling you right now, that motherfucker back there is not real.
So yeah, after watching the video, do you think she's lying? With all the crazy things going on, I wouldn't be surprised if she actually saw a reptilian. But let's say she actually saw something that was not human. Could you imagine the fear this girl was feeling in that moment? Like, just imagine seeing something that you're convinced is not human. I can't imagine that feeling.
This photo shows 14-year-old Ava Wood and her father Christopher, who would later murder his daughter with a 20-gauge shotgun before turning the weapon on himself. Ava was a 9th grade student from Baldwinsville, New York, who was a member of the honor roll and MVP of the girls' soccer team. But on January 20th of this year, Ava's mother called the police asking if they could check up on her daughter because Ava hadn't shown up for school that morning. She explains that Ava was home with her father, who was severely depressed, and that the night before they had spoken on the phone together when he said, "This is how it ends for us." Ava's mother then gives the police officers a key to get into the house, but when they step inside, what they see is devastating. Ava and her father are in 2 separate bedrooms. Both of them have gunshot wounds, and the dad's are self-inflicted. This case is absolutely heartbreaking, and we may never know why Ava's father chose to do this to that poor girl on her birthday.
Okay, so this person killed somebody, and while he was getting interviewed on live TV, he found out they found the body of the person he killed on live TV, and here's the video.
The last time anyone heard from her was an email that she sent out, and no one's heard from her since.
What kind of person was she? I mean, what did you see?
I mean, she's as nice as can be. I mean, very personable, very much a people person.
Do you know any enemies she might have had, somebody that might want to hurt her?
No, we just don't know where she is.
What about in the parking lot area? I know they've been doing a lot of, I think that's where they have recovered the body or whatever they recovered from there.
Body?
Had you heard anything? Had you seen anything there? Had you seen anything there? I mean, we don't know if this is the same person. You know what I mean? Like, they took out a body there earlier. We don't know if it's the same person or not. That's how we're trying to ask people if they know who lived there. Are you okay, sir?
I think I need to sit down.
Okay.
Okay, so this person killed somebody, and while he was getting interviewed on live TV, he found out they found the body of the person he killed on live TV, and here's the video.
The last time anyone heard from her was an email that she sent out, and no one's heard from her since.
What kind of person was she? I mean, what did you see?
I mean, she's as nice as can be. I mean, very personable, very much a people person.
Do you know any enemies she might have had, somebody that might want to hurt her?
No, we just don't know where she is.
What about in the parking lot area? I know they've been doing a lot of, I think that's where they have recovered the body or whatever they recovered from there.
Body?
Had you seen anything there? Had you seen anything there? I mean, we don't know if this is the same person. You know what I mean? Like, they took out a body there earlier. We don't know if it's the same person or not. So that's why we're trying to ask people if they know who lived there. Are you okay, sir?
I think I need to sit down.
Okay.
I've killed and eaten 17 people. My name is Jeffrey Dahmer, or the Milwaukee Cannibal. I was born on May 21, 1960, in Milwaukee, and soon, as a child, I began killing animals and showing an unhealthy interest in dissecting and manipulating corpses. In 1978, I committed my first murder, that of a hitchhiker named Stephen X. His body was later dismembered and buried in my parents' garden. 10 years later, I did it again, meeting a young man in a bar. I took him to a hotel where he never left. I kept my victim's head for 2 weeks, living with my grandmother at the time. After this landmark murder, I went on to kill many more victims using the same method. In 1991, one victim managed to escape and alert a police car on patrol. The police arrived at my home and discovered a multitude of human parts in the freezer, including heads and a heart. The discoveries didn't stop there. In one of the cupboards were skeletons, and skulls were hidden in the kitchen. In 1992, I was finally sentenced to 957 years in Columbia Prison in Portage. My life ended in prison, murdered by another inmate on November 28, 1994.
Her mother and her boyfriend have been accused of holding 2 young boys captive in their home. Katie Koch and her boyfriend Joel Mankey are facing child neglect charges. This was after a horrific discovery was made in Milwaukee. A neighbour of the pair allegedly saw 2 boys aged 7 and 9 peering through a broken window last week. The eyewitness reported seeing 2 children clambering on top of an air conditioning unit and then fleeing out of the property. Other eyewitnesses reported seeing the boys on the road acting like cavemen. Some said it was like they'd never seen the sun before. They were incredibly pale and appeared malnourished, and as if their hair had never been cut or even brushed. The district attorney likened the boys' living conditions to something out of a horror movie. The house they were living in was allegedly piled high with rubbish and feces. The children's room appeared to be locked from the outside, and there was an awful smell inside the house. It's believed that the boys have never been educated, despite the mother saying that she'd homeschooled them, and they weren't even potty trained. The boys thankfully have been taken into protective custody.
What you're about to see is the last video ever taken of 31-year-old Paola Miranda before she mysteriously disappeared. Paola was reported missing on December 17, 2021 after visiting family in Orlando, Florida. The next day, she was spotted by hikers wading in the Wikiva River, and it was there that they captured that final video of her. She then disappeared and has never been seen again. 3 days later, Paola's car was found at the Wikiwa Springs State Park with her phone and keys still inside. Authorities have since searched by boat, plane, drones, cadaver dogs, and have even used an underwater camera system, but no trace of Paola has ever been found. According to FloridaStateParks.org, swimming in the Wikiva River is not permitted, and I'm assuming that's because there are likely alligators and other dangerous animals there. I'm wondering if that's why the hikers recorded Paola that day. Her family confirmed that she struggled with schizophrenia and bipolar disorder, which could have confused her and caused her to become lost that day, but they don't know if that played a factor in her disappearance. At this point, her family just wants her story to continue being told because she could be anywhere, and according to them, they fear that she could have also possibly been trafficked. So they have reached out to the FBI to investigate. If you have any information regarding Paola's disappearance, please call the number on the screen.
I poisoned my boyfriend to receive the $30 million he had just inherited. My name is Ina Kanoyer, and I'm 47 years old. I was living in concubinage with Stephen Reilly, who was 51 years old. A few days ago, his lawyer called him to arrange a meeting, informing him that he was about to receive an inheritance of $30 million. Following this announcement, I discovered through messages that he had confided in some of his family members that he intended to leave me once he had received the money. However, I believed that I was entitled to a share, and I became consumed with rage. I decided to act as if I knew nothing and devised a plan for revenge. For several days, I added antifreeze to all the drinks I gave him, and it took only 2 or 3 days for him to become seriously ill. On September 5, 2023, in our home, Stephen was unconscious due to the poisoning I had subjected him to. I decided to call for help, because I knew it was too late for him. He was transported to the hospital but died shortly after. I passed it off as a heart attack, but the autopsy revealed the truth. I am now charged with murder, and I will not receive a single dollar from that inheritance. I'm currently undergoing trial and face a potential life sentence in prison.
April 16th of this year, 25-year-old Michaela Standridge posted this cryptic message on her Facebook page. 5 days later, she disappeared. Michaela was last seen running out of a house that she was staying at near Concrete, Washington on April 21st. After running out of the house, she called 911 and could be heard screaming for help, but shortly after the call went through, her phone disconnected. Michaela made her last phone call approximately 15 minutes later to a family member, but she vanished right after and hasn't been seen or heard from since. The Skagit County Sheriff's Office arrived to the area where the 911 call was made not long after, but didn't find anyone who needed help. During the investigation, authorities searched the property where she was staying at and interviewed the people living at the home, which was on Skagit View Drive, but this provided no leads. It wasn't until Search and Rescue expanded their search that they found Michaela's phone, which was located near the Skagit River. Authorities have since searched the river by boat, drones, and helicopter, but Michaela is still missing. According to a recent post from Michaela's aunt, she is believed to still be alive. Because of her last cryptic message on Facebook, it's not known if Michaela is being held against her will or if her disappearance has anything to do with human trafficking. But Michaela's family asks that if you see her, to take a picture of her and to try to stay with her until authorities arrive. Michaela is roughly 100 pounds with blue eyes, and she currently has blonde and pink hair. If you have any information about Michaela's disappearance, please contact the numbers on the screen.
I passed myself off as a little girl to be adopted by a family, but I was hiding a secret that would change their lives. My name is Barbara Skrulova, and I had an illness that made me look young when I was actually 33. Fortunately, a mother and her 3 children took me in. But what they didn't know was that I belonged to a sect that practiced cannibalism. My aim was to integrate them into my sect. Little by little, I managed to convince the mother and eldest daughter to join us and lock their 2 children in a cage in the basement, where we mistreated them in ways you can't imagine. We also had cameras in the cage. But one day, some neighbors installed their cameras, intercepted the signal from ours, and discovered our secret. They contacted the police, but it's not over yet. When the authorities arrived, I pretended to be a girl, also locked in the cage, so they wouldn't arrest me. The mother and eldest daughter were arrested, but I managed to escape capture. They took me to an orphanage, from which I escaped a few hours later. But unfortunately, they discovered my truth, and when they went to capture me at the orphanage, I was no longer there. A year later, they captured me in another country, again passing me off as a child. They sentenced me to 5 years in prison, which I've already served. Now no one knows where I am. I was born addicted to drugs due to my mother, Awilda Lopez. My name is Elisa Izquierdo, and unfortunately, my mother was addicted to various drugs during her pregnancy, which led to my own addiction. However, that was not the worst part. My parents were divorced, and my mother had serious anger issues, often subjecting me to physical abuse. My father, Gustavo, was the only one who cared for my well-being. With him, I found happiness, and he did everything in his power for me, even attempting to enroll me in a good school in hopes of securing a better future. We had plans to move to Cuba, which could have ended the nightmare I endured with my mother. However, fate had other plans as my father passed away from cancer, leaving me under the constant watch and custody of my mother. Once back with her, the abuse escalated, with her locking me up and providing me with very little food. On November 15th, 1995, my mother beat me so severely that I lost consciousness, suffering from a cerebral hemorrhage. A neighbor found me and called for help, but it was already too late. My autopsy revealed numerous signs of severe abuse, including broken fingers and toes, as well as internal organ damage. My mother was sentenced to only 15 years in prison. Do you think she received an adequate punishment?
2008, right?
Yeah.
There was a case with a Greyhound bus. Tim McLean was going from Edmonton to Winnipeg. This happened in Canada.
Okay, I was gonna say, where the fuck is that?
All the witnesses say he was in the back of the bus with his hoodie on, headphones on. He wasn't really focusing on anything, wasn't talking to anybody, right? A couple hours later, on a different stop, this guy, Vincent Lee, gets on. At first, he ended up sitting in the front of the bus, away from everybody else, and he ends up going all the way to the back of the bus and sits right next to Tim McLean. He didn't really think too much of it, right? Until out of nowhere, Vincent pulled out a knife and he just started stabbing his chest and his neck. The passengers start freaking out and the bus driver pulls over. They all rush to get off. The bus driver tries to get back on to help Tim. It's already too late. Like, people start calling 911 and stuff. That's when Vincent starts cutting his head off, takes it and start like showing it to everybody.
Like, look what the fuck I did.
And he starts cutting little pieces off. First he eats his heart, and then he starts eating the rest of his body as well.
Wait, in front of the cops, or he's been doing that?
He's in front of the cops, bro. He obviously stops and gets arrested. He ends up obviously on trial and shit. March 2009 mark him as mentally insane, and they can't put him in jail. The reason why was because he said Tim was a demon and that God had told him to kill him.
It sounds like some schizophrenia.
But then over time he was slowly given more freedom. He was allowed to a different city with supervision.
Bro, don't tell me some shit's gonna happen.
And in 2017 he was set free, and still to this day
he's free.
They gave him the right to legally change his name.
So you're telling me if he had moved to the US,
somebody could have passed him, bro, and they would have never known.
Imagine
we're asleep and she gets up to go to the bathroom, and I'm like, oh man, I have to go to the bathroom too, so I'm gonna go to the bathroom in the main bathroom outside the room. I go out, I come back in, and I'm like, why'd you turn my light on my side of the bed? Like, it's 12, we're going to bed, like we're in bed. She's like, I didn't do it, I thought you did. I'm like, okay, well, somebody's trying to get our attention. My phone rings. It's my little sister. She says, hey Bob, sorry, are you awake? And I'm like, I am now. And I go, my light just came on. She goes, that's why I was calling you. She said, is Nicole there? I'm like, yeah. She put her on speaker. She said, Nicole, I don't want to get personal, but and this is how the conversation went. Did your mom have miscarriages before you? And she's like, yeah. She goes, I'm seeing 3, and the reason why I'm saying that is there are 3 people in the room right now trying to get your attention, and they're your 2 brothers and your sister that weren't born, and they're in the room right now with you. Talk to them. So I did. She did. She's like, this is crazy, but I'm like, no, go ahead, just talk to them. So she's talking. Then I take 1, 2 pictures while she's talking. That's the one green with the dresser.
Oh, that was
we saw that outside of the picture.
In 27 minutes of entering a hotel room, 24-year-old Colton Wright was shot and killed by his ex-boyfriend. Colton had been dating 25-year-old Brennan Wakey for a few months, but the relationship was pretty toxic, so much so that Colton had actually broken up with him. Brennan was known to be pretty controlling, and he didn't handle the breakup well. He had reportedly become obsessed with Colton and even threatened him. Fast forward to December 9th, 2021. Authorities were called to the Hyatt Place Hotel in Sarasota, Florida after a housekeeper discovered a dead body in one of the hotel rooms. Upon investigating, the body was confirmed to be Colton's, and he had been fatally shot in the face. After combing through the security footage, Colton was seen entering the hotel at around 2:30 in the morning that same day with Brennan and an unknown man. Roughly 27 minutes later, at around 3 a.m., Brennan was seen on the hotel's security footage, quickly exiting the hotel with a gun in his waistband. Brennan was arrested a few hours later and has since been charged with murder, but despite that, and despite the fact that Brennan was showcasing disturbing behavior before the murder, he has since been released and is walking free with GPS monitoring until the trial. Many believe that the reason he was released, even though he allegedly murdered someone, was because of his status in the community. He was a young graduate from NYU that went straight into Wall Street. He and his family are very well off, and they know a lot of people with a lot of power. I try really hard to never give my personal opinions in videos like this, but the fact that Colton will never get to see his family again, all while Brennan is out and updating his LinkedIn profile, absolutely disgusts me. Right now, the trial is set for November 6th, but it has been pushed back a few times before, so I'll keep you guys updated.
God, you're so beautiful. God, she's so beautiful, man. Am I right or wrong? Look at her. How am I supposed to do this interview? Look at this woman.
Tell me your story.
She's so beautiful. Go on, man. Talk to me, baby. Tell me your story. Tell me yours. Let's get out of here. Let's go. Let's go have lunch. My God, I love her. Look how beautiful she is.
Thank you.
God, wow, man.
So, Tom Hanks?
Wow, man. Yeah, Tom Hanks.
I found out that you are a nerd like me. You love Dungeons and Dragons.
I'm anything like you because I love you.
But
I'm anything like you because I love you. Guys, really? Look how beautiful she is. You guys think it's a joke. How am I supposed to sit over here when I'm looking at such beauty? Come on, guys. She's so beautiful. I'm in love. I'm in love with the interview.
So you play Dungeons and Dragons?
I play Dungeons and Dragons.
So I brought you...
I did say I'm pretty good.
Did you? Eu sou o Groot.
It's so good.
Eu sou o Groot.
I love her. Man, she's so fucking sexy. It's not. I can't do this interview. Look at her.
Eu sou o Groot.
Does anyone say this? Guys, what's wrong? Am I the only one that's saying it? Look at her. She's so fucking beautiful. It's like you can't even do an interview with her because you're just like da 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 da. Right or wrong? Oh my God, guys, someone save me. When did this turn into beautiful world? When did this turn into the most gorgeous girl in Brazil? When did this turn into I love you?
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
This is the shocking UK case that has just come to light of Alex Batty from Oldham. This month, Alex Batty, who went missing aged 11 during a 2017 holiday to Spain, was miraculously found. A student had been making a delivery at 3 a.m. in a rural town in France. He suddenly came across a teenager looking dishevelled, walking in the pouring rain. It was pitch black and he knew something was up. The student stopped and struck up a conversation with Alex, and as they got talking, Alex's unbelievable story of survival came to light. The student ended up putting Alex's name into Google and realising he'd been missing all of these years. Alex had been trekking for days for over 22 miles. The student let Alex use his phone to send a message to his nan, 68-year-old Susan. Alex tried on multiple different apps to try and get hold of her and wrote, "Hello Grandma, it's me Alex, please pick me up." On another app, he wrote, "Hello Grandma, it's me Alex, I'm in France, Toulouse. I really hope that you receive this message. I love you and I want to come home." The student dropped him off by a local police station to try and get him some help. 6 years earlier, Alex had gone on holiday to Spain with his mum and his granddad. They'd actually taken Alex from his nan who had custody of him. They sent his nan a video at the end of the holiday telling her that they would not be returning him to her. Alex was forced to live in religious communes in remote locations. He'd been named Zach Edwards while living there. He ended up deciding it was no way for him to live and escaping of his own accord. Police are currently hunting his mum Melanie and the granddad. Alex was reunited with his nan and said, "When I got back to Manchester, it was raining as usual. I was driven back to my grand's house and I walked in the door and she's in the living room. I started shaking and just gave her a massive hug."
If you're thinking about ignoring your gut instinct, don't. Here are 3 reasons why you should trust it. Reddit user Kylan13 said that he went out on a couple of dates with the girl, but he got a weird vibe from her, so he didn't stay in touch. She stabbed her next boyfriend 2 months later. Megan said that she was being pursued by a man. He kept coming into the bar that she worked at and was constantly asking her out. Directly, there was nothing wrong or troubling about him. She just got a terrible feeling whenever he was talking to her. She would feel terribly sick. All of her female coworkers kept egging her on to go on a date with this man, though. She kept saying, "No, something about him makes me sick." Eventually, one of her friends convinced her to go on a double date with her and her boyfriend and this man. It only lasted about 2 hours before Megan said she wasn't feeling well and got a cab home. She didn't see the man for a couple of weeks, so she thought that maybe he had gotten the hint. But no. The same friend who pressured her into going on a double date called Megan, yelling hysterically. She said that she would never doubt Megan's judgment again and forwarded her a news story about how the same man was just arrested a couple of days before for the murder of a woman he was dating. So the entire time that he was trying to convince Megan to go on a date, he had already strangled and killed another woman and set her house on fire to try and cover it up. A former Reddit user said that she was sitting in her bedroom one day when she got this intense feeling in her gut, which was sort of saying, "You need to get out of here right now." Then she started to get this immense feeling of terror, like she was being watched. She immediately got out of there and went to a friend's house. When she finally got back home, her house had been ransacked. Things had been knocked over, lots of glass had been broken everywhere, and a window was left wide open. She says that now she always takes that gut feeling more seriously.
Each of these pictures have a backstory that will make you sick to your stomach. This just looks like a normal family photo of a bunch of siblings, right? That is until you know what the two older brothers on the right did. This is the Beaver family, and the two oldest brothers of the family, named Robert, who was 18, and Michael, who was 16, plotted to kill their entire family for years. The pair was obsessed with serial killers and wanted to gain fame and notoriety by carrying out mass murders. And they then decided to start with their family. On July 22nd, 2015, their 13-year-old sister named Crystal walked by their room, and Robert then grabbed her, covered her mouth, and then cut her throat. She screamed, and other family members came running into the room. Their mother then came running into the room, and the two boys then stabbed her over 40 times. The brothers then stabbed their father over 50 times, and their 12-year-old brother over 9 times. Then they stabbed their 7-year-old brother 6 times, and their 5-year-old sister 18 times. In the end, they killed 5 family members, their parents and 3 siblings, and seriously injuring another. These two psychopaths' goal was to kill as many as 100 people, but they obviously got caught for these horrific murders, and Robert Beaver and Michael Beaver eventually pleaded guilty to all counts and was sentenced to life in prison. Next, on October 6, 2023 in Cambodia, a man named Sam Ang, who you see in this picture right here, beheaded his wife, who was in this picture also, and he also beheaded their 2-year-old daughter. Sam Ang was a drug user, and he had an argument with his wife because of jealousy. Witnesses said that they heard the couple arguing before the incident, and they then heard a bone-chilling scream on the day of the murder. This case is still under investigation, so not much information and articles about it are available online. However, pictures of the crime scene are. The pictures are extremely gruesome, and you see the beheaded bodies of both his wife and his 2-year-old daughter.
This influencer was killed after sharing her seemingly perfect life with her online following. Alexis Sharkey was a social media influencer who grew up in Pennsylvania. She posted to Instagram and TikTok and had a large social media following. She lived with her husband Tom, and the pair regularly posted cute photos together. Alexis was last seen alive on November the 27th, 2020 at around 6 p.m. The following day, her husband started asking people if they'd seen her or heard from her. At 8 a.m, there was a shocking discovery. Police found the body of Alexis discarded with no clothes on in some bushes. The bottom of her feet were unusually clean, so this led investigators to believe that she had been dumped there and not walked. She was found down the road from her apartment and had been strangled. Soon after the discovery, police started questioning Alexis's husband as they found divorce papers in their apartment. This was obviously a huge red flag. Then Alexis's friends came out to say that she had recently, on a girls' trip that they'd been on, started expressing concerns about hers and Tom's relationship. She disclosed to her friends that she was actually experiencing DV from Tom, and he would regularly choke her out. About 2 weeks after the murder, Tom fled to Texas. Bizarrely, he had absolutely nothing to do with the funeral plans, and this was left to Alexis's mum. Tom's behaviour started getting more and more suspicious. There were regular attempts by the police to contact Tom, and he was uncontactable. Eventually, they were able to get in contact with him, and he agreed to submit a DNA sample, but when the time came, he never did this. Police were then finally able to get an arrest warrant for Tom. They stated that he was the only one to have the means, motive, and opportunity to kill Alexis. They arrived to where he was staying, but before they could place him in custody, he unalived himself. Authorities later did state that Tom had been untruthful and evasive with investigators. Was this girl a runaway, or was the letter left to her family written by her killer? Megan Nichols was a 15-year-old girl from Fairfield in Illinois. It was July 2014, and Megan had recently been arguing with her mum. Her mum had found out that she'd been dating a much older guy, and she was really unhappy about it. As a punishment, she confiscated Megan's phone. The male in question was called Brody Merbarger. Eventually, Megan was given her phone back, and she told her mum she wouldn't speak to the guy anymore. On the 3rd of July, Megan and her mum were due to spend the day together. However, Megan said that she felt ill. Her mum went and ran some errands that day, and when she came home later on in the day, Megan was nowhere to be found. Her mum had gone into her bedroom at around 11:15 that night to say goodnight to her, but it seemed like Megan had vanished. Kathy also found Megan's phone in her bedroom, and weirdly it had been reset. A note was also left that read, "I love you, but I will never be happy here. Don't look for me." A search began of the local area, but there was no sign of Megan anywhere. No one had any idea whether Megan had really left of her own accord or had been taken. It was 3 agonizing years until any news. On Boxing Day 2017, female remains were found in Wayne County in a shallow grave. They were sent off to be identified, and it eventually came back that the remains were Megan. Now, locals were suspicious of the guy Megan had been dating. However, police had no grounds to arrest him. Then, years later, in October 2020, an arrest was made. Brody had been taken into custody and charged in relation to Megan's death. In court, texts were revealed between the pair indicating that they were actually planning to run away together. However, Brody never left town following Megan's disappearance. He also claimed that he had no idea where Megan had gone, despite the fact that police found Megan's blood in his car. He'd also given many conflicting stories about his whereabouts to police on the day that Megan vanished. The prosecution argued that he had suffocated and strangled Megan and then buried her body. He was found guilty and given 50 years in prison.
This is why you should always be aware of your surroundings. A woman was walking home one night with her child when this happened. Everything's normal until a man comes out from the darkness. He then proceeds to go to the door and start banging on it, seemingly trying to get inside to the mother and her child. Ali Porath, the mother who was seen in this video, later took to social media to explain that this all happened at around 7 p.m. at night when she was returning home from getting groceries. She explains that she had seen that man before, waiting out alone in front of her house, just watching. But ever since this happened, she hasn't seen him. And that's why it's always important to be aware of your surroundings.
If you're thinking about ignoring your gut instinct, don't. Here's one reason why you shouldn't. TikTok follower Belina Lynn said that she was hanging out at a park with 3 of her friends late at night. They were wanting to head back home since it was getting late, so they decided to head back to the car. But when they got there, they realized that they had locked the keys inside. Belina and one of her friends started to get a really bad feeling, and they even started feeling sick to their stomachs. All of a sudden, 2 random guys showed up to the park. They started talking to them, but Belina said something felt off about them. She said that the feeling got so bad that her and one of her friends decided to step away from the group and call her mom to come and pick them up. But the moment they got off the phone and turned around, the 2 random guys had pulled out knives and started hitting her friends. Belina and her friends were able to get away safely and call the police, but the 2 random guys were never found.
Is this the clearest photo of a ghost ever captured? Let's talk about it. This is the image of the ghost boy from the Amityville horror haunting. And at the time that this photo was taken, there was no child inside of this house. If you don't know the story of the Amityville horror, it's one of the most famous haunted house stories in American history. If you don't know why the house is allegedly so haunted, we have to go back in time. On November 13th, 1974, Ron DeFeo entered the family home that he lived in with his parents and his 4 siblings and shot all of them to death. This means that he committed 6 murders in the house in one night. Afterwards, Ron said that he had heard voices that were telling him to kill his family. But the real motive for this crime has never been revealed. Only a year after the murders happened, 1 year, the Lutz family moved in. Apparently the house was being sold for very cheap, and when they were about to buy the house, the realtor told them that 6 people had just been murdered in here last year. And that didn't affect their decision at all, and they moved in. When George and Kathy moved into the house, the typical things that happen in a haunted house started. They were hearing voices, doors were slamming by themselves. Ooze formed on the carpet, smells came and went. George said that he would wake up at 3:15 a.m. every single night, the exact same time that the murders began. And hordes of flies would swarm the house. Only a month after moving into that house, they left. And that's where Ed and Lorraine Warren came in. They were called out to investigate the home, and even though they didn't pick up on anything too crazy, Lorraine did say that she felt like there was an extremely evil presence there, something that may have driven Ron to commit the murders. It was during one of these investigations, though, when the photo of the ghost boy was captured. According to the story of the investigators, a camera had been set up inside of the house to take photos in the middle of the night when no one was inside. And when they went and checked their roll of film after the photos had been taken, they discovered this haunting image. A lot of people who have analyzed this photo say that the ghost boy looks like John DeFeo, one of the family members who was killed by Ron in that massacre. And even though over the years tons of people have taken a look at these photos, no one has ever been able to truly debunk them. Now, if this truly is a ghost photo, I gotta say, it is one of the creepiest I've ever seen. I mean, you never see the definition like with this boy and the glowing white eyes. All of it is just so eerie. But let me know your thoughts below. Let me know, do you think that this is a real photo of a ghost? I get it if you're skeptic too. You don't have to say, oh, I don't believe in ghosts. I'm talking about to the believers here. What do you think about this photo?
What? Nothing there, mate. Nothing there. What? There's nothing there.
These are the worst deaths imaginable, and this is a massive trigger warning because this one is just awful. This was 14-year-old Harley Dilley that lived in Ohio. Harley was last seen alive on December 20th, 2019. At 6:15 that morning, he approached his mother and said he wasn't feeling good and that he couldn't go to school. His mother then obviously said get to school, but Harley was then pronounced missing the following evening. It was normal for him to be gone overnight, but as a 14-year-old, that's kind of odd to me. Harley also had autism and ADHD. When he was reported missing, police searched all of his friends' houses and his ex-girlfriend's house. They obviously searched his home as well, but he was never found. A month went by and Harley was still not found. This was until police got a tip to search a house that was in Harley's neighborhood. The house was under renovation, so they just looked into the windows, and they didn't see anything. The police then entered the home with permission from the owners who were not staying there at the time. And they were then immediately hit with the smell of decomposition. And while searching the second floor, they found Harley's jacket next to the fireplace vent. And since they were so close to the fireplace vent, they looked inside the chimney, where they found the decomposing body of 14-year-old Harley Dilley. So what they think happened was Harley got on the roof somehow by himself. He then went and crawled inside the chimney feet first. Harley was 4'9" and wore clothing from 10 to 12. And the interior of the chimney was 9 inches by 13 inches. And his shoulder width was about 12 inches. And when Harley realized he was stuck, he began to take off his clothes. They believe he then tried wiggling and he got stuck. Like permanently stuck to where he couldn't move at all. This is the chimney he was stuck in, and they say his right hand was stuck behind his back, and his left arm was stuck against his chest in a way of which his forearm was touching his chest. And his head was pointing up. He died from compressed asphyxiation, and it likely took several hours for him to die. It was a slow and painful death, and this all happened because he did not want to go to school that day. I can't imagine the fear and anxiety Harley Dilley was feeling and going through while he was stuck in the chimney. This is honestly such an awful way to die, and may Harley Dilley rest in peace.
Actor Vin Diesel has been accused of sexual assault in a really disturbing new court filing. Let's take a look at these allegations that are breaking right now. So if you don't know who Vin Diesel is, he's the star of the Fast and Furious movies. He's a pretty famous Hollywood celebrity. Well, allegedly in fall of 2010, during the filming of the movie Fast 5, a former assistant of Vin's is claiming that he assaulted her. So according to the official filing, a woman named Asta was hired by Vin Diesel's company. The company is named One Race, and she was hired allegedly to do a lot of different things around the production. She would do a bunch of different things like helping organize stuff for the production company, and she was also asked to go accompany Vin Diesel to company parties and places in public. So according to Asta, the woman who filed these charges, in September of 2010, she was tasked with waiting for Vin Diesel in his hotel room at the St. Regis. At the time, Vin Diesel was allegedly entertaining some hostesses from a club, and when these women left the hotel room, that's when allegedly Vin Diesel grabbed Asta's wrists and brought her over to his bed. Asta then claims that she escaped his locked wrist. She asked him if she could leave, and he then started to grope her, kiss her body, and just be creepy with his hands. Asta said that she felt like she just couldn't say no to her superior, but when he tried to pull down her undergarments, that's when she allegedly took off screaming down the hallway. According to the filing, keep in mind this is all just alleged right now, Vin Diesel then caught her, he pinned her up against a wall, placed her hand on his private parts, and he proceeded to pleasure himself. And according to this filing, that's when Asta, his assistant, closed her eyes and just let it happen because she was so afraid. So only a couple hours after this whole thing went down, Asta received a call from Vin Diesel's sister. She was the then president of the production company One Race, her name's Samantha Vincent. And what did Samantha have to say to Asta? Well, she told her that she was fired after being on the job for less than 2 full weeks. So Asta signed an NDA, or non-disclosure agreement, when she accepted the initial position working for the production company, but thanks to an act in California called the Speak Out Act, she is able to come forward with these allegations because this act basically states that you can't have an NDA for something like a sexual assault. So obviously this is very early on in the story, and this is a breaking story, so more details are going to emerge soon, but Vin Diesel has already come out and said he categorically denies all of these allegations, but we'll just see how this thing turns out with time. Breaking news, a shootout between this guy and the FBI 2 years ago has just led to a massive arrest of over 100 members of a global pedophile network. This is a tragic and sad story, but I'm thankful that these people are being arrested and brought to justice. So this is David Lee Huber. He was born and raised in Louisiana, but he eventually moved to southern Florida where he lived for most of his life. And on February 2nd, 2021, the FBI showed up to his front door because they were serving a warrant for his involvement in a CP case. And apparently the things that this guy was doing involving the CP were graphic and disturbing, so they sent out a huge force to take him in. So when agents first showed up at his door to serve this warrant, he saw them on his Ring doorbell camera, grabbed a rifle, and immediately began firing at them. A lot of the officers returned fire, but unfortunately 2 officers were struck and killed immediately. These were officers Daniel Alfin and Laura Schwarzenberger. Laura was killed instantly, but Daniel was hit and managed to return fire before he was killed. So after an absolutely massive police presence showed up and began returning fire, Daniel Lee Huber then barricaded himself inside of his home, returned fire a few times, but eventually took his own life. This obviously led to a massive response from the authorities, and when they looked into the computers and devices that he had in his possession, they were shocked. So apparently Daniel Lee Huber had been tied into an international pedophile ring. This ring operated on the dark web, they had highly encrypted file sharing devices, and this network spanned the globe. And when they found out that this guy was connected to all these other people, an international investigation was launched. Part of this investigation was focused in Australia, where a bulk of the people committing these crimes were located. I mean, all of this was made public just yesterday, but the Australian suspects that were just arrested are between 32 and 81 years old. They're highly intelligent, as was stated on the release. They know how to manipulate computers and internet networks. And a lot of these members of this ring were producing and sharing their own CSAM or CP, which means that these men were some of the worst of the worst. But this led to an international investigation, like I said, and people were arrested here in America as well, a number of pedophiles that were attached to this network. So I definitely would consider this a win. Obviously, we don't know yet who was connected to this, what's going to come out of this, or exactly what these people were doing, but I think this is a step towards justice. And sadly, these 2 agents who heroically sacrificed their lives trying to protect children ended up saving so many more. But yeah, just here in America, 43 people connected to this investigation have already been arrested for producing CP, possessing CP, all of that. And I'm hoping they will arrest hundreds more.
This is a story of the most evil nun known in history.
Her strong character had evolved into a formidable force.
This nun has unalived 27 people, but was believed to be responsible for the of 500 more. She devotees, including children, and starved them until their last breath. And by the way, she also acquired around 300 houses and farms all across Greece. And she did all of that under the pretense of serving God. And you better stick around to find out how a nun became one of the world's deadliest serial killers that ever lived.
She was sentenced to life in prison, but within her convent, she is still revered as a saint.
Before Miriam Salakoutis became well known as a and a criminal mastermind, she was just a farmer and a factory worker in the small town of Creta in Greece. But everything started to change when she met with Father Matthew, to which she decided to leave her old life and start serving the old Calendarist church. At the time, Father Matthew was having his doubts with his current church, so he decided to form a new one, and Miriam helped by securing lands to build their convents. But no one knows how Miriam had acquired them. As time went on, she gained more respect and more responsibilities of the church were passed on to her, and this is where things get a little messy.
Both Miriam and Matthew were tactful in hiding their true intentions when they started this new convent.
To get more funding for their church, Miriam targeted wealthy women to join the convent and them until they surrendered their fortune. She would deprive them of sleep, starve them, and punish them just so that she could obtain their wealth. Some were also blackmailed. It was kept a secret for years because these new recruits were made to follow an isolated life of devotion, which cut them off from the outside world. But as horrible as that sounds, she did something more sinister.
All new members were required to take a vow of poverty, and this meant that all their savings accounts were emptied and dumped straight into the church's tax-free account.
She also established a health retreat up on the mountains for tuberculosis patients, because at the time there was no known cure for TB, and they suggested that the higher altitude of her mountain abbey would help them heal, only to find out that they were left out there to and their money taken away from them. But now the question is, why did people believe her in the first place? Well, it was reported that following her method was the only way for her new devotees to get to heaven, and their belief in Mother Miriam was so strong, and as flawless as her operation was, it all soon came to a halt when the authorities began to sniff around her convent.
It all came to a head when the FBI contacted Greek authorities in 1949 and informed them that they were looking for a Greek-born US citizen who had been taken to Mother Miriam's convent.
Although residents had been hearing screams within the walls of the church, she was finally investigated when a believer's daughter contacted the authorities after she received a letter that her mom's land was signed over to Mother Miriam. It took 85 police officers 2 days to raid the convent, and they found malnourished elderly women and dozens of starved children, along with hundreds of bodies within the church grounds. Miriam was ultimately charged with fraud, abduction, and unlawful detention. But the worst part is, to this day, there are still those who believe that she is innocent. But what do you think?
This is one of the worst Brazil cartel execution videos, and whatever you do, don't go looking for it. Before I begin, I'm just going to say right now, this is probably one of the worst beheading videos that I ever covered. The backstory behind the video is basically non-existent, but people believe it's from Brazil. The video is 2 minutes and 51 seconds long, and it's a very hard watch. As you play the video, you see a man lying on his back on the ground. He's wearing a blue shirt which is unbuttoned, and his hands are tied behind his back. The camera shot is looking over him, giving you a bird's eye view of the victim. The man is on-gagged, but isn't making a sound. He realizes his time is up, but is showing little to no fear and remains calm. After about 4 to 5 seconds, a man with a machete begins repeatedly striking the victim's throat with it. But the killer is very inaccurate, sometimes hitting the victim's throat and other times hitting the victim's chest, leaving deep cuts. Another man can be seen holding the victim's hair to stop him from moving. Blood begins to pour as the victim's chest and neck is continuously being hit by the killer with the machete. After about 10 or so strikes, the victim lets out a couple of grunts but still doesn't scream. After several strikes, the man carrying the machete then places the blade in the wound on the victim's neck and starts to saw away, which cuts through more flesh, which causes a huge flow of blood. At this point, the victim can be heard gurgling on his own blood as he struggles to breathe, as well as hissing sounds which is coming from the severed windpipe. As he chokes, blood gushes out of the victim's mouth, and it appears the victim is still fully conscious, as his eyes are darting around the room and his mouth opens in pain. As the killer continues to saw away with the machete, the gurgling of the victim stops, though his eyes are still moving. The sawing sound of the machete sounds different after a period of time also. You hear the grinding as the machete blade cuts through the victim's spinal cord. The man who was holding the victim's hair then takes his machete and takes over, once again sawing at the victim's neck, breathing very heavily as he does it. The other man then starts slicing the victim's chest, removing a piece of flesh so that you can see some of the victim's sternum. He then cuts deeper into the chest around the bone, exposing a part of the victim's lung. As this is happening, the other man is still slicing away at the victim's neck. As he cuts through the victim's spinal cord, he lets out a psychotic laugh. And at the 2 minute and 30 second mark of the video, the beheading is complete. The severed head is then held up to the camera as the men hold up gang signs. The head is then placed on the victim's stomach and the video concludes. This video is so brutal and it's one of the worst beheading videos I've ever seen, and I urge you to never look it up or watch it. As I said, this video has little to no backstory, and it's just mind-blowing that so many people die in such horrible ways without anyone knowing their identity or their backstory. It's genuinely sad. They've been erased from existence in the most lonely and terrifying ways imaginable, and no one will ever know who they were.
This woman's affair with her married boss would end in deadly consequences in the middle of a car park. Candy and Rob Hall had been together for years when they moved to Idaho from California in 2006. The pair had 2 teenage daughters and good jobs. Candy worked as a paralegal and Rob was a computer specialist. However, things weren't as picture perfect as they seemed on the surface. Candy was heartbroken to find out her husband was cheating on her. He'd been having an affair and Candy kind of blamed herself. She felt that maybe it was her fault that the marriage had got stale, and the pair decided to stay together and try and make it work. Now, Candy's self-confidence had taken a huge knock. She then found comfort in a colleague called Emmett Corrigan. It was 2010 and Candy had just started working at Emmett's new law office and they instantly clicked. However, Emmett was married. He had a wife named Ashley pictured here and they had 4 children. Ashley was actually pregnant with his 5th child at this point. The chemistry between the two of them though was undeniable and Candy started having an affair of her own. Within a matter of weeks of working together, Emmett and Candy were being intimate behind their partners' backs. Candy stated that Emmett was giving her the attention that her husband didn't. Meanwhile, poor Ashley was left really confused with why Emmett seemingly had changed towards her. She had actually never found it threatening that he was working with Candy as she was so much older than her. Ashley was 10 years younger and thought that Candy was just kind of like this older woman at work that Emmett found like a mum relationship with. By February 2011, Emmett was spending less and less time at home. Heartbreakingly, in a desperate attempt to try and make their marriage work, Ashley actually started to go to marriage counselling on her own. On the evening of the 11th of March, things would unravel in the most devastating way. Emmett and Ashley ended up in a huge argument over the state of their relationship. Things got really heated and Emmett was still refusing to tell Ashley the truth about what was going on. Emmett stated that he was going to Walgreens. Meanwhile, Candy also announced to her partner that she was going to Walgreens. The pair met up and Emmett drove them off in his car to a remote spot where they could be intimate together. However, Candy had not been as sly as she thought. Her teenage daughter spotted her car in the car park and rang her mum to see what she was doing there. Her daughter told Rob about the car in the car park and Rob turned up himself. CCTV captured Rob searching around for his wife and then going back towards his vehicle. Rob rang her and confronted her and realised she was with Emmett. Away from the view of the CCTV, a fight broke out. Gunfire could be heard and Emmett lay bleeding on the ground. Candy rushed over to Emmett and kissed him as he passed away on the ground. She then placed a 911 call and was screaming at her husband during this. Poor Ashley found out about her husband's affair and death on the same night. She did actually get remarried in the end and became a successful author and public speaker. As for Rob, he claimed that he had a loaded gun and it simply fell from his pocket during the fight. He was convicted of second-degree murder and given 30 years behind bars. Candy actually ended up spending 18 months in prison for stealing over $30,000 from a previous employer.
This famous actress from old Hollywood allegedly took her own life, but I really don't think that she did, and after this TikTok, I don't think you will think she did either. This is Thelma Todd, an actress from the golden age of Hollywood. She was one of the biggest stars in her day, and in later years she's been compared to people like Madonna, even though her career at the time was much bigger than Madonna's ever was. Thelma Todd was nicknamed Hot Toddy. She won awards for both acting in comedies and dramas. She was a former beauty queen and a very successful businesswoman. By the year 1935, Thelma had a huge film career and she even owned her own cafe. This cafe, which she worked hard to open up herself, was called Thelma Todd's Sidewalk Cafe. And this was an extremely popular cafe for the Hollywood elite to go dine in during their days off or during work days. It was glitzy, it was glamorous, it was absolutely beautiful. and Thelma was a successful household name, but unfortunately, tragedy would strike soon. December 16th, 1935, Thelma Todd is found dead in her car parked in a garage. This garage that she was found dead in was only a block up the hill from her cafe, literally kind of in this direction, and it was said that she died from carbon monoxide poisoning and had taken her own life. But what didn't and still doesn't make sense is that she had a massive film career. She was super successful, had a very, very big business, so why would she do this? Well, people think that she didn't do it, and we're going to go through a few of the suspects who may have taken Thelma's life for her. But first, a little evidence. So even though her body showed signs of carbon monoxide poisoning, when they took a look at Thelma's body, they found that she had 2 broken ribs and a cut lip. Not exactly injuries that you can sustain from taking your own life with carbon monoxide poisoning. They also found that Thelma's shoes were virtually brand new. There was no wear on them, and if she really had walked up from her cafe all the way up to that garage up that rocky hill, investigators all agreed that her shoes would have been way more worn than they were. No note was ever found left by Thelma, no justification for what she had allegedly done was ever made. But yeah, let's look at the suspects and why they may have wanted Thelma dead. So first there's Paul DeCiso, pictured right here. Paul was Thelma's ex-husband and an agent, quote-unquote, who was very closely connected to the Los Angeles area mafia. And just the year before she was found dead, Thelma had divorced Paul after he beat her severely. People think that Paul could have been humiliated by this and was seeking some sort of twisted revenge. Then there's Roland West, a failed Hollywood film director whose career never took off, and he was also a business partner who owned some of the cafe that Thelma had opened herself and operated. Roland and his wife Carmen were business partners with Thelma, and all 3 of them lived in an apartment above the restaurant. Apparently, Roland really hated the way that Thelma had blown through men in her time, and he resented the affairs that she had gotten herself into. There's also Jewel Carmen, who was married to Roland West, the last guy that we talked about, who was also the 3rd business partner in Thelma's cafe. Jewel was in fact the owner of the garage that Thelma had allegedly taken her own life in. At one point, Jewel Carmen threatened Thelma Todd when the cafe began to lose money. And she also claimed that Thelma was wasting all the money that she was making on the cafe. There's also Charles Lucky Luciano, who was an East Coast mobster who moved to the West Coast to establish a mafia there. He apparently had been angry with Thelma because he wanted to establish an illegal casino on the 3rd floor of the restaurant. The 3rd floor at the time was completely unused, but when Thelma told Charles that she didn't want a casino inside of her restaurant, he freaked out. There was also Thelma Todd's own mother, Alice, who, right before her daughter's death, had begun telling people that she was about to build a massive mansion. Apparently, she had the feeling that she was about to come into a lot of money, which she did when her daughter died. So did Alice have her daughter murdered, or did Alice murder her own daughter to take that cash? I guess this is a mystery that we'll never solve, and with Thelma Todd's death still being ruled a self-unaliving, I don't know, it's still a mystery. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below.
This schoolboy stabbed his teacher to death in front of a classroom full of students. 61-year-old Anne Maguire was a Spanish teacher teaching in Leeds. She'd actually worked at the school for 40 years and she was only 5 months off retirement. However, in April 2014, something absolutely horrific happened. One of her students was 15-year-old Will Cornick. He'd always been described as a smart student who never really caused any trouble. Classmates regarded him as a polite student, but after he got diagnosed with diabetes, his personality seemed to change. In 2013, he tried to join the army, but because of his diagnosis, he was rejected. Being in the army had been his dream, so this was really upsetting for him. After failing to complete his Spanish homework, he was given detention by Anne. He also expressed a wish to her that he wanted to drop Spanish, but she wouldn't let him, which only angered him more. He began to develop a deep-rooted grudge against Anne. Shockingly, he reportedly messaged his friends on Facebook asking if one of them would kill her for him for £10. During one school day, halfway through his Spanish class, Will decided to get up and attack Anne with a knife. The classmates watched on in horror as he chased her out of the classroom. When there, another teacher heard her screams and tried to shield Anne from any more blows from him. Will then allegedly returned to his class and told his classmates how it was a shame that he hadn't killed her. However, Anne did actually pass away from her injuries. Will later admitted that he did plan also to kill 2 other teachers. One of them was actually pregnant at the time. He's been sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 20 years. This is one of the most horrific cases I've heard recently, so please be warned before watching. 29-year-old Taylor Parker has just been sentenced to death for a crime so horrendous that I can't believe a human is capable of this. Regan Simmons Hancock and Taylor had met online. Their online friendship soon blossomed into a real-life connection. It was 2022 and Regan was married with a young daughter. She was also 8 months pregnant at this time. Taylor was also pregnant, or so it would seem to the outside world. She was posting pregnancy pictures on social media and even hosted a gender reveal party. Little did her loved ones know that she was actually staging the entire thing. Regan and Taylor were really good friends around this time and they were bonding over their pregnancies. Regan even shared a Facebook status thanking Taylor for bringing her round a gift and Starbucks. This was the day before she would be murdered by Taylor. On Taylor's supposed due date, she made her way round to Regan's house in Texas. Shortly after, Regan's mum made a horrifying discovery. Her daughter was face down on the floor, deceased with blood everywhere. Her mum rang the emergency services and they raced to the scene. It became apparent that her baby had been, and again a massive trigger warning here, ripped out of her stomach, and Regan had been stabbed over 100 times. Meanwhile, Taylor was pulled over for speeding and driving erratically. She'd actually put the baby in her lap with the umbilical cord coming out of her trousers to make it seem like she'd just given birth. When the pair were taken to hospital, the horrors of what actually happened became apparent. The newborn baby tragically passed away and Taylor was arrested. She was sentenced to death, but her defense lawyer said that her loved ones should have done more to protect her earlier on when she was pretending to be pregnant.